All right. Good morning and good afternoon for folks on the East Coast. I'm watching our numbers rise, and I'm so excited to have everybody join us today. Um, Look at that. Okay, good. I'm just seeing you all pour in. So normally I would give it a second, but I think that for the sake of staying on time, we're just going to get rolling. So for those of you who've joined us before, you may know me. I am Carrie Scott. I work at Spruce Health. I manage this webinar series, and I'm always thrilled to be able to include an exciting guest speaker. Of course, we have one of those with us today. Little bit of light housekeeping really quickly. This will be recorded. So if for some reason you have to jump off, if you miss something, don't fret. I will be sending out a link to the recording after we wrap. Also, we've disabled chat, but please use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. You can ask them as we go. If they're relevant to the material that we're discussing at that moment, we'll answer them right then. And if it's a little off topic, we'll save it for the end. But Dr. Carleen McMillan is with us today to answer all of those pressing questions that you have and impart some incredible wisdom. So with that, we are going to be learning about the Private Practice Toolkit, podcasts, conferences, newsletters, and learning communities that are sure to elevate your practice. And I just teased out our guest speaker here, but Carleen McMillan is Chief Medical Officer at Osmind. She focuses on product growth and medical affairs. I could, of course, read all about her, or I could just pass the torch and let her tell you a little bit about herself and then get this awesome session underway. So with that, Carleen, on to you. And I'm going to just mute my video, but I will be right here listening the whole way through.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you, Carrie, and thank you everybody for joining us. So I am an adult and child psychiatrist. Used to run a very large multidisciplinary group mental health practice in New York, and now run a smaller one focusing on interventional psychiatry, which includes things like esketamine and transcranial magnetic stimulation. And my main full-time job is at Osmind, which is an electronic health record EHR. And so in that role, get to work with practices across the country, delivering all sorts of mental health treatments, and really get to kind of a bird's eye view of all the different resources out there that help us kind of grow as clinicians. And so today I'm here to share that with you. My special interest has always been working with folks with more kind of complex mental illness, more kind of higher acuity. So you'll see that in some of my recommendations, those skew a little bit towards that direction. But I do think from learning about those ways of working, you can actually work with the wide range of psychopathology that presents in your clinic, whether you're a mental health clinician or primary care, family medicine. We're all seeing folks with different types of psychology, different types of mental health problems. And so I thought today be fun to kind of give back some of the resources that I've learned over the years. So next slide. So I think for those of us in private practice, we do all of our training, and then we're ready to go out into the world, and it can be kind of lonely. And unless you're going to conferences, you can kind of get a little bit rusty, and it can be hard to know how to keep up. So over the years, I've learned a number of different strategies to really stay connected to my colleagues, to stay connected to what's next in the field of mental health, and contribute as well with my own ideas. And so I'm hoping after today you'll feel equipped to do the same. And I'm sharing resources that I like. If I'm not mentioning ones that you absolutely love, since the chat's disabled, please do feel free to send it in as a question, even though it's not a question, and I will share with the group if you have any strong recommendations. And please include sort of what you like about the resource, so I can share it out and we can all learn together. All right, next slide. So we'll talk a little bit just briefly, what is Osmind, what is Spruce, how do those fit into my toolkit? Then we'll talk a little bit about online communities. I'm going to focus on ones that are predominantly for psychiatrists, but the way you find them really applies across the board to different specialties. So there'll be some learnings there, different types of mental health conferences, mental health podcasts, different types of newsletters. And again, I am a psychiatrist, but I think actually a lot of these really speak to the future of the field of mental health, and so can work for a wide range of mental health disciplines. We'll talk about some professional organizations and then some kind of high yield online and more traditional training courses for kind of staying what's up to date with mental health. Next slide. So in terms of technology tools, my practice is really powered by two main things. One is Osmind, that's the EHR. We're an electronic health record that specializes for mental health. So we work with a lot of practices offering ketamine and ketamine-assisted therapy, general psychiatry therapy, and interventional psychiatry like TMS and esketamine. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can go ahead to our website and request a demo. And I will just say we do have some end of the year specials. So if you get in under the wire here in the next week or so, I'm sure that you can get a good deal. All right, next one. And then the next tool that I use, been using for almost 8 years now, is Spruce. I think probably many of you are here today because you're also Spruce users or interested in it. But for those that don't know, Spruce is kind of an all-in-one communications platform that's HIPAA compliant. You can use it for your phone, your eFax, texting, and secure messaging, as well as telemedicine. I also use it for internal communication with staff, kind of to-do list and tasking. It really is so much more than just a phone system. And so it's one of those things that kind of no matter where I go in my practice, Spruce goes with me because it really is so foundational. And it, plays nice with whatever EHR that you're using. So, all right, so now on to the meat of the talk. Someone did ask me a question, will it be recorded for later view? And yes, it is being recorded today. So we'll be able to send that out along with kind of an ebook summary as well. All right, so let's get into it. All right, so online communities. So, Facebook or Meta as it's called. I would say, a lot of people don't really like Facebook or maybe don't use it that much these days. I actually still use it mainly for professional purposes. So there still are a lot of robust communities on there that are essentially gated to professionals. So the ones that I belong to tend to be for psychiatrists, and you have to kind of show your NPI license number, things like that, before you're allowed in. So it really is more selective and does keep out a lot of the spam, a lot of the nonsense that you wouldn't want there. If you're a psychiatrist, Psychiatry Network is probably the biggest one. There's one called Women's Psychiatry Group. Private practice psychiatry is probably the highest yield one for me as a private practice psychiatrist, where we kind of talk about all things from running a practice to de-identified cases. And then finally, Interventional Psychiatry Network. Now, if you're not a psychiatrist, there are equivalent groups out there for psychiatric nurse practitioners. There's a lot of therapy groups out there. If anyone here has any they'd strongly recommend, certainly you can type them into the Q&A. One thing to keep in mind with these is that Facebook does censor some words. So for those of us who are involved with psychedelic medicine and things like ketamine, this can be kind of limiting on Facebook. And so I've known whole professional groups be sort of brought down by people using the word ketamine or cannabis or things like that. So you do have to be careful on these forums. And people sort of do have some concerns around Facebook's privacy. So they're not for everybody, but I would encourage, if you still are on Facebook or Meta, to check them out. I've gotten many referrals from these communities, I would say, or if I have a patient who's moving to Idaho and I don't know any psychiatrists in Idaho, chances are I can post on that network and within an hour, I'll have multiple psychiatrists from Idaho ready to be my patient. So I would say that's a huge use for them. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is that you shouldn't put too much case information. Obviously, no personal health information should be on there. But even so, like the rule that I follow on these groups is if the patient reading it would know it was them, it really hasn't been de-identified enough. So change enough of it, keep it vague enough so that someone reading it really wouldn't be able to know. And the other thing to keep in mind is that Facebook does allow anonymous postings. However, a lot of this stuff, people do find out who it is. So I've seen a lot of people on these groups post complaints about their employer or a coworker or something like that. And these groups are quite big. And I have seen it kind of come back to bite clinicians, and their boss does find out. So anything you're typing on these forums, even though they are private and they are gated, make sure that you don't put anything on there that you would not want your boss to see, or B, your patient to see, or C, to be read in a court of law. These things are subpoenable in the case of court cases. That has come up before. So not to scare you, but really the best use of these is for more like practice management type questions, referrals, again, that are de-identified, that sort of thing, and really don't go kind of hardcore with, personal information. We did have a question about psychiatric nurse practitioners. I believe if you just look on Facebook, you can search like psychiatric nurse practitioner forum and you'll find one. I've certainly found several. I can't as much vouch for the quality, as I'm not a psychiatric nurse practitioner, but these equivalent groups do exist. In addition, if you are a practice owner, most of these groups do have a way to post jobs. So if you have an opening in your clinic, some may allow posting for free. Others may, like Psychiatry Network, for example, has a small fee, but you can post an ad and they'll run it a couple times. And I've actually, in our old practice, we hired at least 1 or 2 clinicians straight off of this Facebook group, and it's a lot cheaper than a headhunter and a lot less noise than posting on Indeed or something like that. So it can be a really high yield way to get other professionals to work with you. Because people don't always like Facebook, there are also private communities. So an example of one with Osmind, for those that are using our EHR, we do have a very robust practice community that uses a separate platform. It uses something called the Circle platform. For those who are members of something like Alma, which is the therapy collective, Alma has the same kind of setup. So you log in and it's got like a really nice interface for having dialogue, just like you'd have on Facebook, but also a lot more kind of organization and storage of resources, courses, etc. So if you are a member of a group like that, that's certainly an alternative. And I find myself, although I'm still active on the Facebook groups, I find myself kind of gravitating more towards something that uses this other type of platform, like it's called Circle, but what Osmind uses. And then an additional one, if you happen to be in New York, New Jersey, Atlanta, Chicago, Colorado, or Connecticut, there is something called the Clinicians Collective. And that's something where you pay an annual fee. I believe the fee is around $50. It's not much. And it allows membership to kind of an old-fashioned email listserv type situation. But it also allows you to sign up for health insurance. So they have this collective thing where for each region, they have purchased a plan that rather than getting something off the health exchange, if you're in solo or small practice, you can elect to purchase this group health insurance. So I've known a lot of therapists in particular that have made use of that. Clinicians Collective, I believe, started in New York. When we first started, it was just there, but over the years, it's expanded. And so if your state is not listed, you still might want to check in, because I think they are adding states pretty quickly. Clinicians Collective, it's for mental health clinicians in general. So you'll see all different kinds of clinicians on there, from prescribers to therapists. Pretty active forum for your region. Definitely a great way to get referrals, or find referrals for your cases, or space. I speak a lot of like, hey, I have an office to rent, or I need an office. That's a great place to do that. And then finally, your professional organization probably does have some listservs. I know for the American Psychiatric Association, we do have those. But to be honest, I don't find those to be quite as lively and robust as these more sort of private, independent ones. So I'd be curious if someone does have a society one that's pretty lively, but these tend to be monitored by the society staffers and everything. So I think that the ones that are sort of fully independent and run by the clinicians themselves tend to be a little bit more organic and just kind of high yield. So I would check those out first. So if anyone else has others, please do share. Otherwise, we will move on. We can move on to the next one. Okay, so psychiatry conferences. Now, I know many of you may not be psychiatrists, but a lot of these meetings tend to be quite large and multidisciplinary. And if you think about it, psychiatry is the ones that publish the DSM-5. So a lot of the sort of thinking in the direction of the field tends to be discussed at these conferences. And they also allow people to present from across disciplines. And so whenever I go to these conferences, I run into folks of all different types of mental health disciplines. And next year, coming up in May, the American Psychiatric Association annual meeting is actually in New York. Tends to be pretty big, tends to be pretty well attended. So if you are in that area or interested in attending, would strongly advise to check it out. It's a very large conference. They have a whole innovation center as well. And they have a lot of networking events that week. So it can be a great place not only to earn CME, but to just meet a lot of colleagues. Similarly, the American Academy of Psychoanalysis and Psychiatry meets every year in October. That's a meeting I never miss. Really fun group of people. The ACAP program also has a lot of mentorship type opportunities and scholarships for residents and trainees. So if you are that, or you work with folks who are more trainees, definitely encourage them to apply, even if they don't want to be child psychiatrists. If they're a medical student interested in attending a conference, that could be a great kind of introductory way to get them there. The Clinical TMS Society. Now, some people might not know what TMS is. It's transcranial magnetic stimulation, a non-medication treatment for things like depression and OCD. It is typically administered by psychiatrists or psychiatric NPs, although you'll also see neurologists administering it, CRNAs, things like that. And it's something that I find many therapists are curious to learn more about. In particular, may have clients who are not interested in medications or have not been helped by medications. This can be a great alternative. So if you're interested in that, the Clinical TMS Society has a wonderful annual meeting. This coming June, it's going to be in London. It's a bit international, but if you're looking for an excuse to go to London, would recommend checking it out. It should be a fun time. The American Academy of Geriatric Psychiatry meets in March, and Psych Congress meets in fall. Those are two I don't typically recommend or attend. I do recommend them because geriatric psychiatrists recommend them and general psychiatrists recommend them. And so when I've asked colleagues kind of polled, what do they like? What do they think are good CME opportunities? Those two kind of consistently come up. So you might want to check those out as well. And along those lines, ACAP also has a Psychopharm Institute in January that's pretty popular, separate from its annual meeting, and that's usually in New York. So those are ones people typically do go to get CME. I also put the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, MAPS. They just had a conference this past year, a really, really big psychedelic conference, super multidisciplinary. I don't think they're going to have that every year, but it's one of those things where if you're at all curious about the field of psychedelic medicine, the role these new medications are going to play, or you're interested in doing therapy in this space, that conference is really one to not miss. It really is quite an experience. So would recommend checking that out. And then finally, I just got back from a conference that was put on by ASKP3. ASKP3 is the American Society of Ketamine Physicians, Psychotherapists, and Practitioners. It's held every year in Texas in December. Now, even if you're not somebody who is a ketamine therapist, this still might be interesting for you. What I found about this conference was it was super interdisciplinary, and basically the common denominator was mental health clinicians and other types of medical specialists who are really interested in working with patients who weren't getting better with more kind of traditional talk therapies and oral medications. So even though the main focus is ketamine, a lot of the talks were actually about other types of approaches and just how to run a business in this space, how to kind of offer new things. And it's kind of a small group, kind of an intimate group. And so it's still one where if you go, you'd meet a ton of really interesting people who are really passionate about the field. And so strongly recommend checking that out. A lot of people that were there didn't offer ketamine. They're just interested in learning more about the space. So don't be intimidated by that one. So these are kind of, kind of the standard ones that, I would recommend trying to check out. If others have ones they'd recommend, certainly let me know. There is an OCD one annually as well, that I've never been to, but I've heard really, really good things, predominantly a therapy conference, but really quite high yield. And I think OCD is one of those things that we do see a lot, but there isn't as much evidence-based treatment out there as we would like. So if you're looking to kind of get more training in that, the OCD conference could be of interest. All right, next slide. So podcasts. So I'm sure many of you listen to non-mental health podcasts. There are many, many podcasts out there. But I wanted to kind of list, and sometimes those podcasts have mental health topics, but I wanted to list ones that are kind of core about our field. So a couple of the big journals have podcasts where what they do is they basically will recap a major topic. And so if you're not really into reading the journal article, then you can just listen to the podcast instead. And indeed, some of them do offer CME, continuing education credits, for answering some questions after you listen to the podcast. So JCAP, the Child Psychiatry Journal, the Orange Journal has one. The Green Journal, which is JAMA Psychiatry, has one. Or sorry, the Green Journal is the American Journal of Psychiatry, and then JAMA Psychiatry has one as well. So you can just subscribe to those. Those generally are kind of shorter episodes, but they're pretty consistent. They're not the most entertaining, but they are, factual and will help you stay on top of the literature. Moving on to the conversational podcasts, these are ones that I would highly, highly recommend hitting subscribe on and listening to regularly. So there's one called Psychiatry Boot Camp that's actually run by a psychiatry resident. I believe he's a 3rd or 4th year resident. And he is interviewing kind of the leaders in the field in a very didactic way about kind of core mental health topics. And it's absolutely fabulous. It's geared towards trainees, but I listened to it many years out of practice and out of training and still learn. 2 episodes in particular that I think are just absolutely outstanding was there's an episode on suicide risk assessment featuring Tyler Black. Tyler Black is a Canadian psychiatrist who is very much known on Twitter for writing about suicide and epidemiology around suicide. And it's just an absolute tour de force, this episode of Psychiatry Boot Camp. He goes into really nuanced, really, really helpful, practical tips around assessing suicide. And I think any mental health clinician could benefit from listening to that episode. That was, several months ago. And then kind of hot off the press, actually, is just a new episode that just dropped this weekend featuring Lois Choi Kane of McLean Hospital. She runs the Gunderson Personality Disorders Institute. And she does a real wonderful overview of borderline personality disorder and kind of personality disorders in general. Personality disorders are something that are fairly prevalent in the general population, but extremely prevalent in mental health practices and even primary care. So her whole thing is like, even though many of us are not going to get specialized training in DBT or MBT or TFP or any of these other specialized acronyms, there is a way to work with these patients and understand some real basics that we can implement in our day-to-day practice. And so that podcast episode does just a beautiful job going over all of that. He does other ones too, delirium, management of agitation, etc. Just really great, very listenable podcasts. The next one is the Huberman Lab. That's out of Stanford. He tends to interview, he's a scientist, and he interviews a lot of kind of neuroscience people, psychologists, psychiatrists. It's generally for a general audience, but he goes really in depth. So that can be a good one, particularly if you're interested in psychedelics or neuromodulation, things like that. That one should have kind of a lot of really kind of interesting scientific gems. Psychedelics Today is a podcast, as the name says, about psychedelics. they're going on for quite a few years. They put out quite a few episodes, and they interview pretty much everyone in the field. So I think if you're at all curious about that field, then it's worth checking out a couple episodes there. For example, if you're interested in what MAPS is doing with Rick Doblin, there'll be an episode with him. Pretty much everyone from every major company involved in the space has gone on that show. Various therapists have gone on that show. And so I think, even if you're not planning to be a psychedelic therapist, your patients are going to be asking about it. The field is moving pretty quickly. And so it behooves us all to kind of get familiar. And I think that podcast is geared kind of towards the general audience, but one of the hosts is a therapist himself. So it does have a little bit of a clinical bent. Definitely recommend that. And finally, there's one called Psychopharm Updates. That is, I believe it's by the Psychopharm Institute or something like that. They have something where you can subscribe and pay money and do kind of more in-depth stuff, but they have these little bite-sized nuggets, maybe like a 15-minute podcast on how to use a new medication. I find those are sort of great for, walking to the bus stop or whatever, really quick kind of listens. So those are kind of my favorite kind of conversational ones. In terms of private practice podcasts, these are ones that are generally a little bit more about kind of running private practice and logistics. There's one called Psychiatric Advances that's run by more of an academic, but is still quite practical. There's the Practice of Therapy, which isn't going to be psychiatry specific, but is going to have a lot of basics, particularly around like marketing and things like that. So it's worth checking out. There's another one that I discovered a year or so ago called Doctors and Litigation, the L Word. This one is really super interesting. The host is, I believe, an emergency medicine physician who had a malpractice suit against her like a decade ago, and basically has now been interviewing all different types of clinicians about their experience with malpractice, how it impacts your day-to-day practice. I think it's something that we don't talk about enough, and it's worth listening to. Can be pretty intense, but highly recommend that one. Practice of the Practice, again, is more of like a therapy oriented kind of nuts and bolts, how to run your practice podcast. Great for folks just starting out. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention our own podcast at Osmind. It's called Psychiatry Tomorrow. And that either features myself or my colleague, Dr. McGinnis. And it is kind of probably a hybrid between these private practice ones and the conversational ones. So some of our episodes may be like really practical, like how to add Spravato to your clinic. And the others maybe, interviews with, like, we have one where the immediate past president of the American Psychiatric Association. So we try to do stuff that's kind of relevant for the field as a whole. Talking about new treatments, new ways of practicing. So encourage you to check that one out. It only comes out about once a month or so won't bombard you with episodes. So I think those are the main ones that I find myself subscribing to and listening to. I'm sure others are out there as well. If there are any that you love, feel free to let us know now or send it in after for inclusion. And hey, if you don't like any of these, encourage you to start your own. A lot of people starting podcasts. There's a lot of tools out there. There's a tool called Descript that makes it really easy. It's way easier than it used to be to start a podcast. So if you feel like you have a voice and something that's really not out there that you'd like to share, would encourage you to kind of just go for it. It does not have to be highly produced. It's pretty easy to just get going. And you'd be surprised how many people will tune in. There's not a ton of these things in this particular area of podcasting, so you still have room to make a difference. Next slide. All right, so psychiatry newsletters or mental health newsletters and blogs. So the first one I would recommend to really everyone, even if you're not a mental health clinician. It's called Psychiatry at the Margins by Dr. Awais Aftab. Dr. Aftab is a forensic psychiatrist by training, but really is quite a historian of the field of psychiatry and mental health. He used to have, I believe, a pretty extensive column in Psychology Today where he would interview sort of controversial figures in the field. And Psychiatry at the Margins really asks tough questions about the field. He will interview people who maybe even considered sort of the almost anti-psychiatry movement, and he'll interview them in a really thoughtful manner. And he asks tough questions about diagnosis, about how we work with people, being very patient-centered, really nuanced. He's been doing it for about a year. I believe it's free to subscribe to, and so I think it would be worth certainly checking out. He's had a lot of great guests on there. The Carlot Report also has a great newsletter that you can sign up for, and they actually have a great LinkedIn presence. So if you follow them on LinkedIn, they do like really kind of bite-sized information, particularly about newer drugs coming out or any sort of questions that are coming up in the field about different types of therapies. They'll do sort of bite-sized nuggets about it that are really digestible, really kind of evidence-based. The next one is The Frontier Psychiatrist by Dr. Owen Muir, who, full disclosure, is my husband. But this this newsletter is actually pretty popular. I would say his and Dr. Aftab's are the ones I see the most in terms of just random colleagues mentioning that they're reading. They're both on a platform called Substack. Substack is a way that any of you could start a newsletter. It's very easy to use, and there aren't that many in our space. So similar to podcasts, if you have an idea for a newsletter, you can go on there and start one. I think Dr. Aftab has been a guest on Dr. Muir's one, and vice versa is coming on soon. He'll be on Dr. Aftab's. I would say that The Frontier Psychiatrist is a little bit more about kind of healthcare as a whole. A lot of, if you have animosity towards insurance companies, probably going to be some fun ones for you on there. Concerns about private equity. And then I think the one that got that one sort of to go viral was something about the company Cerebral, where he wrote kind of a little bit of a different take on Cerebral, the company that was doing a ton of ADHD prescribing. So if we're looking for kind of hot takes on the field, that's a fun one. Two Docs in a Snack, also written by two psychiatrist brothers. Doesn't come out as often, but when it does, it's really high quality, really good like memes and diagrams. They did a really great one about the proposed telehealth changes. So just really readable. And I think it's great that we have these sort of clinician-led, not part of a major institution, just kind of free-flowing information, like high quality, consistent output coming from these types of blogs. And they are fun to read, and you can just subscribe and they'll come to your inbox, or there's even an app for them. The next one is Experimentations. This is a Psychology Today blog. This is by Dr. Grant Brenner, who's a colleague here in New York. He's written a number of books as well. He writes a lot about kind of the intersection of mental health and sociology. And his blogs are very, very widely read by mental health clinicians across the field. And again, a very sort of approachable, humorous style. So encourage you to check it out. Psychiatric Times is one of those ones that just sort of comes in the mail. You sign up for it and they send you an email, and it's fine. It's free. So I will admit I read it. It's sort of helpful. And then finally, of course, we have a Psychiatry Tomorrow newsletter through Osmind that you're welcome to sign up for, where we generally have blogs that are kind of related to the podcast and other types of future of psychiatry type information. All right. So a little bit about professional organizations. I know I mentioned meetings, but I think just going to a meeting is really not going to give you an in-depth connection to a professional organization. Now, the ones that I've listed here are ones that are more meaningful to me as a psychiatrist, or meaningful to my colleagues. But I think I would encourage everyone, particularly as we look at our renewal season, we're probably getting things in the mail, should we or should we not pay our dues for these societies? What do they really do for us? I have gotten involved with these professional organizations really from day one. I would say my first exposure really was as a medical student, getting a scholarship to go to the ACAP meeting, and really getting exposed to mentors at a young age. And then when I became a fellow, I applied to be on a committee at ACAP, and now I'm the co-chair of the committee. And I would say that like there's no doubt in my mind every year that I'm going to renew for ACAP, because I have such a strong professional connection dating back from when I was a student to now, as a full, I'm not even early career professional. The connections I've made, kind of people across the country, the mentors I've made, particularly female mentors, which sometimes can be hard to come by, is really, really important. And then at many of these organizations, if you don't like something about the field, if you don't like the way things are heading, or you want to advocate, this is where it happens. This is where, with this committee work, it can be kind of slow and unglamorous, but it will tell you kind of how it is to affect change for your professional guild. So would strongly advise getting involved. Some are more interdisciplinary than others. So for example, a newer one is called the American Psychedelic Practitioners Association, or APPA. Very low dues, very, like, really, really low dues. They used to be like $1, not $1 anymore, but very, very low. And this is a new interdisciplinary organization dedicated to the professionalization of psychedelic medicine, looking to do eventual training and accreditation. They're working with folks in Washington. They have lobbyists. It is so early to get involved with this organization that you would have a chance to be part of committees, really have a seat at the table. And so I would strongly advise, if you have any interest in kind of that area of the mental health field, to just sign up for their webinars. They're free. They're once a month, right? And get a taste. And then if you want to raise your hand and do more for a society, then that's great. Similarly, I think ASKP3, is focused on ketamine, but is multidisciplinary. Members can be across many different disciplines. And so if you have any interest at all in kind of that area of mental health, would encourage you to go to some of their webinars, or even, say that you want to get more involved. They're forming a number of different committees and things like that. For American Psychiatric Association, it would be the same with the American Psychological Association. They can seem really Byzantine, they can seem really hard to break into, but they all have local branches. And so part of your dues always goes to these local branches. And that can be a really easy way to get involved. Again, I think I did like social media for the Massachusetts district branch when I was like, a second year resident or something like that. Because I knew how to use Facebook at the time or something. There's going to be ways that you can be helpful. And you can meet your colleagues locally. And particularly if you're in private practice, you're not academic, you really want to stay connected, these local branches are definitely the way to do it. You may get an email from them once a year about their holiday party, but I guarantee you behind the scenes, they're having a lot more meetings, they're having a lot more committees. Just raise your hand, say that you want to be involved. And it can be just a great way to get out of your little sort of private practice bubble and connect with colleagues. So we can go on to the next one. All right. And then finally, I just wanted to include some trainings that, again, I think are pretty accessible. I think not everybody's going to do, psychoanalytic training or DBT training or anything like that. So what are some more sort of bite-sized trainings that are available? So there is one from McLean Hospital. So McLean, in Belmont, Massachusetts, is very much known for its personality disorders work. They have a personality disorders institute. And through that, they have something called Good Psychiatric Management Training that's geared towards BPD, but it's $45. It is self-paced. If you want to do more in-depth training there, they certainly have that. But the goal with that was really that everyone, from therapists, psychiatrists, even primary care doctors, could benefit from this self-paced training. This, has to do with patients who may be perceived as difficult, patients who are taking more resources from an assistant or for your time, kind of really practical ways to approach them, work with them, and have a more kind of productive interaction overall. So that one is a really great resource. John Gunderson, who's considered sort of the father of borderline personality disorder, conceptualized this and then passed away, but now it's kind of fully realized, and I think it's well worth the $45. The way that I practice from a therapy standpoint is predominantly based on something called mentalization-based treatment. And that's out of the Anna Freud Center in London. They do have some really excellent trainings. And I think MBT is something that can be used kind of transdiagnostically. So if you're a therapist looking to really kind of hone your skills and do either a 2 or 3 day training, not like a 2 week training, not like a super ongoing thing, you can do an MBT training and walk away with some skills that you can actually use. I'll remember when my husband did this training years ago when he was a resident, and it was just, I think it was just 3 days, and he came back and one of his patients was like, do you have a new supervisor or something? Like, this is feeling really different. It's good, but it's different. And that was just after the 3 days, and it was subtle, but it changed the approach enough that it really kind of kickstarted a new way of sitting and being as a therapist. And so I would encourage you to check that type of training out. um, if you are at all interested in any of this sort of interventional type of stuff, TMS, Clinical TMS Society has a pulses course they run like 4 times a year. I think there's one in Australia. They have it like around the country, even around the world now. Highly recommend taking that course, kind of a crash course in offering TMS. And similarly, ASKP3 and the Integrative Psychiatry Institute do have an asynchronous course for those that are interested in beginning to incorporate ketamine or ketamine assisted therapy into their practice. So that one can be good to check out. And if you're interested in further training, they do then have in-person courses as well. And then last but not least, ton of interest in psychedelic trainings recently, because we do anticipate within 2024, 2020, late 2024 into 2025 and 2026, we do anticipate things like MDMA and psilocybin to become FDA approved. And we anticipate they're going to be approved with psychotherapy as part of that. And there's going to be a huge demand for therapists who are trained in this modality. And so far, not that many people are. So there's a number of organizations out there that are gearing people up to be prepared. There's many others on here, but two I wanted to just mention that are pretty well known are Fluence, a really good reputation. And there's a newer one called Beckley Academy out of the UK. And the one with Beckley Academy is there is an online asynchronous one that can be appropriate even for staff that are not fully licensed, or medical assistants, people like that maybe are not a full therapist. And then there's one that's more for a licensed professional that is not asynchronous but is online, and I think over 6 months. So these can be ways that you can start to incorporate this in your day-to-day without taking a ton of time out of your schedule to go to a very expensive training or retreat or something like that. So I know there are probably others out there, but these are the ones that either I've experienced or have seen my colleagues just get a ton of things out of. And so I hope that they will be helpful for you as well. Next slide. And I think that's wrapping up. So curious if anyone has any additional questions or resources. If not, please don't hesitate to send them in after to us. Like I said, we will be sending out a recording and a recap of this. And I hope this really just kind of jumpstarts you thinking, maybe some of these weren't right for you, but maybe you will find one that is, because I do think that this can be just a part of your day to day, because it can be very monotonous to just see patients in and out and doing paperwork. And if you start to enhance your day with these types of experiences, attend a webinar in the evening or at lunch, it'll really start to enrich your experience, connect you to your community, and continue to learn. I think that's really what we're all here to do, and ultimately patients benefit from that. So with that, I think we will conclude. And then I think my next slide has my email. Feel free to reach out.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carlene. This was incredible. And I know from where I sit, this was all new to me. So I'm guessing that there was probably a lot of net new stuff here for the folks who joined us today. I'm just looking one last time, no new questions, but if anyone on the call thinks of one, give Carlene a shout. I will follow up with the recording later today, and keep your eyes peeled for the ebook, where I'm going to have all of these rounded up for you in an easy downloadable takeaway that you can just hang on to or pass along to a friend. So with that, we'll just wrap this one up. Thank you, Carlene. It's always a pleasure having you. You're so great.
Always a pleasure.
Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.